Hey everybody, Derek here. I'm here to bring you another video for The Walking Dead Season 5. Tonight what I wanted to do was in the following up of Bob's death that happened last night on The Walking Dead. What I wanted to do today was a video basically detailing 5 characters that I miss the most since they've departed from The Walking Dead, and a little bit of a couple notes about some stories that I really would have liked to seen from a few of them. I feel, in my opinion, that Walking Dead has never done a character a lot of injustice overall. That when the character died, I feel like there was a lot of dignity, at least, with it. That it was the right time to die for the character, that they really had an impact on the storyline because of their death, and it wasn't just because they killed them off because they felt like it. I think that overall it makes a lot of sense in the story. As I look back, that's my opinion. But I want to look at a couple of characters and what they could have done with them. So, which is the reason why I miss them the most. So that's what I'm going to do tonight in this video. Just in case you're not caught up on Walking Dead, if you're for some reason a couple seasons behind, this will contain spoilers. So just in case, there will be spoilers, so don't watch the video if you don't want to be spoiled. Okay, so number 5 for me is Dale. And, the actor Jeffrey DeMunn left the show in season 2, from what I understand from reading, because Jeffrey DeMunn has been in everything that Frank Darabont has ever done. Look back at both of the men's acting careers, and anything that Frank Darabont did, Jeffrey DeMunn did. So I think that's why he was, in the series, and I think that was part of the reason why he quit the series. From what I understand, is he quit the show, and that's why they killed him off. But I do miss Dale's presence. Dale was such a very integral part of the Walking Dead story. I mean, in the comics, he was in the show. He was in the comics up until this part of the story. We just recently saw the Fear the Hunters storyline in The Walking Dead, and Dale lived up the whole way through that point, and he was the one that ended up getting his leg cut off and eaten. And he also was the one that lost his leg in the comics instead of Herschel. Now, when I look back, I think that Dale was a very great moral compass. He definitely was a very important character on the show. And I loved his interactions with a lot of characters like Glenn, with Andrea, and even with Rick. I felt like that there was a lot of things that they could have done with him later on. And I think about, when we get to the later parts of the story, in some ways it was good that Dale died because it allowed other characters to fill those roles. Because really in the comics, Herschel is not as developed as Dale. Dale gets a lot of focus on, losing his leg, being like the moral compass of the group, trying to, keep order, doing a lot of things and Herschel's pretty much just the farmer that, is out there, using Axel to, dig up the ground and plant seeds. That's really all that Herschel really does, in the comics after he, has his story arc at the farm. So really, because of the fact that Dale died in the TV show, Herschel was able to, form a little bit. But I think it would have still been nice to see maybe the two men, work together a little bit. Maybe they would have had some of the same ideals. Plus, I think that, it would have been nice to explore Dale and Andrea a little bit if Andrea never would have left. I mean, again, this is assuming a lot of different things. But I think that, Dale's presence on the show is very important, and you do feel the void that he left when you watch the show. I do still wish that Dale was around, that they would have done the story with him throughout, but again, I think it also lends to, they definitely were able to do a lot of other stories that they wouldn't have done if Dale was still alive. So give and take, but I do still miss Dale, absolutely. Number 4 is believe it or not, the governor. You might be wondering, why do I miss a villain? Well, the fact of the matter is that the governor is definitely a very interesting villain, and I mean, I think that's why they were able to keep him around for so long. I mean, the comics feature him off and on, basically. Like the fourth and the fifth volume really, focused on, excuse me, the fifth and the sixth volume in the comics focus a lot on him, and then he disappears, and then he comes back in the eighth volume. But there's always a lot that goes on with the governor. And, it's always interesting to see, how methodical he is, how that switch keeps flipping. And, I definitely think it was a very interesting cat and mouse game with the group. And I think that, Walking Dead could have done a little bit of a better job in the TV show of reintroducing him again. It's like I've said, if they would have just focused on both groups and not have done those two governor storylines back to back in those back to back episodes, I think it would have been done a lot better. But you know, nonetheless, I still think that the governor was just one of the best villains. Probably even better than the hunters. I mean, the hunters really didn't get their fair share in Walking Dead. In regards to timeline wise over the governor. I mean, the governor got a whole season and a couple episodes in the fourth season, whereas the hunters really got only 4 episodes to really show who they were. But I always thought it would have been very interesting, and I know that this would have been a little bizarre, but could you imagine if the governor would have survived the prison and then made his way to Terminus? It definitely would have been very interesting to see the governor and Gareth together at Terminus. I mean, I understand why they couldn't. But again, this is more of just like, what could they have done with the character that might have been interesting. And I think, wow, if they would have had the governor show up at Terminus and there would have been just a few episodes there with the governor, reintegrating himself in with Terminus instead of, being at the prison, that might have been interesting. And I think it would have been a very interesting interaction. The other thing I thought was, man, think about what would have happened if the governor would have ended up in the train car, if he would have survived the prison assault and ended up in the same train car as Rick and the group. That would have just been absolutely brutal. Obviously, again, these are just alternate things, but nonetheless, I just really think that the governor was a very good villain. It was definitely very interesting. You definitely were on the edge of your seat seeing these two groups battling it out with each other. And there's part of me that still wishes that there would have been a little bit more to it. But again, I think they cut it off at the right time. But you still do miss the governor and you do miss the storylines that go along with that. I know I do. So that's why he's number 4 on my list. Number 3 is going to be Merle Dixon. Merle in general was just a character that was very interesting. I mean, we loved Merle. We loved him being his, crazy self, arrogant, not listening to authority. We loved that. We loved seeing the bully in Merle come out. And, you definitely feel that void missing in the later shows as things got more and more serious, and more brutal. I think that Merle definitely would have adapted a little more to that. But, I think it would have been interesting to see Merle acclimate a little more with the group and seeing how he would have actually interacted if he would have, come back from that mission. What would they have thought? And I think that you can still pull off, Merle as a character, even though he did a lot of bad things. Just because Merle would be working with the group wouldn't necessarily mean that it would, harm him as a character, and it would, disapprove of his excuse me, would not mean that we would not like him as much. I mean, yeah, we kind of like that rebellious side to him, but you saw that they were able to work together, Rick's group and Merle, when things were mutually beneficial. And I think that if Merle would have taken the governor's people out, then I think that maybe they would have been a little more accepting of him And I just think it would have been interesting to explore that a little more, to maybe see Merle come back a little bit from, being with the governor, doing those terrible things, and seeing how, he could work together in this group and see his relationship with Daryl improve. I definitely think that it would have been interesting to see that. They could have explored that. But again, I can understand why they went the route that they did. Again, all these characters, I feel that they had appropriate endings, that it really made sense for the storyline. But, it doesn't mean that we don't miss them, and I think that Merle is definitely a character that a lot of us miss. We miss Michael Rooker, and I think that it would have been great to have Merle stick around for a few more seasons, no doubt about it. Number two is going to be Shane. Shane was definitely a big part of the first and second seasons, and I mean, he really left a big impact on the show. Just again, like I always say that Shane was a little early for his time. A lot of the things that Shane advocated for are correct. Later on down the road, when you have to do these terrible things, would the rest of the group have been able to do it? And, you can see that, a lot of what Shane advocated for and stated, you see the characters now having to do. But again, I think that a lot of Shane's problems had to do with Lori and Carl. I think that, again, I always say that they were his Achilles heel. If Shane wouldn't have, been so close to Lori and Carl, if he would have been able to let them go, I'm not going to say that he's the best leader, but I think that there were a lot of things that they definitely could have done with him that really would have made it interesting to see the dynamic between Shane and another group of people. One thing I thought about that would have been very interesting for them to explore with Shane would have been if he did kill Randall, but instead of Rick killing him, the walkers would have shown up earlier and they would have attacked the farm and Shane would have escaped. And instead of Shane ending up with the group, that he would have ended up in Woodbury. I thought that would have been pretty amazing. Looking back on it, if Shane would have ended up there and he would have established himself with the governor, and him and Merle would have kind of worked together, that would have been interesting to see. Them working together and just seeing Shane be an enemy to Rick and the group, and how that dynamic would have worked and how it would have affected Lori and Carl. Shane would have been like, come to this town. We have a great, community here, and trying to get back in between Lori and Rick. That could have been an interesting idea. I mean, again, you realize you're stretching, but I think that it was definitely a great role that Shane had on the show. And when you take him out of there, you do realize that he is missing. I mean, all these characters, I feel like you look back on them and you think, boy, what would have happened if they would have been alive? And again, I think that Shane, it definitely would have been interesting to see him interact with the governor and attack Rick's group. I think it would have been a definite, way to keep his character in the storyline, and it definitely would have made a big difference and a big impact. I think it would have been an interesting story to explore, but again, I think they did justice to Shane, and I think that it all worked out in the end, in the storyline. But I do miss Shane. He was a great character. And finally, number one is Herschel. No doubt in my mind, Herschel just had a very great presence on the show. I mean, Scott Wilson is just a great actor in general, and I think that, when you got to see how much Herschel grew as a character, you realize just how essential he was in the group, how wise he was, and just the role that he played with Rick. I mean, you kind of saw like almost like a father-son kind of relationship kind of between the two. You just saw that, like, when Rick was having problems dealing with the apocalypse, he would turn to Herschel. And you saw him do that, with whenever Michonne, whenever they were going to offer Michonne up to the governor. You saw that whenever he saw the girl stab herself in the fourth season premiere. You saw how hard that was for Rick to deal with. And anytime that Rick was having a problem, he sought out Herschel to try to help him get through it. And I think that it would have been definitely interesting to see how Herschel would have reacted to the people like the Hunters. Because you saw where Tyrese kind of now fills that role a little bit. You see how that shifts, and now Tyrese is like the one who's playing the pacifist, we need to stay like a moral compass kind of group. And I think you'll start to see that maybe Tyrese is now the new person who's going to try to keep them on the moral straight. But I think it would have been very interesting to see Herschel's viewpoint on the Hunters. What would he have done? And I think that it also would have been hard, though. I agree. With Herschel only having one leg, it's definitely going to be difficult for him to get around. So I understand why they had to kill him off at that point. But nonetheless, you always think about what would the characters have done. And I just think that it would have been neat to see Herschel outside of the prison in this exposed new world and to see how he would react to it. Would he have still, advocated for these peaceful, compromising humanity ways, or would he have been so freaked out by these cannibals that he would have just been like, Rick, kill them all? I don't know. And, you do wonder, the differences between the kinds of groups that you run into. A lot of them were sheltered from a lot of things that were going on out there in the world when they were in the prison. They were sheltered from a lot of things, no doubt about it. And I think that when you're exposed to something new, you're gonna have various different, viewpoints towards it. And I don't know if Herschel would have necessarily been as, forgiving as maybe somebody like Tyrese is trying to advocate for with Sasha. When he was saying, you should forgive the Hunters for what they did to Bob. I don't know how Herschel would have, come out on that, but it would have been interesting to see. But I know that a lot of us do miss Herschel, and I think that, his presence on the show was very important, and it's hard to see him go. But again, I also miss Bob. I didn't put him on the list because he's just recently dead, so it's kind of hard to, gauge how much you're going to miss him necessarily. But again, seeing Bob die was definitely a hard storyline to see, and I really will miss him overall as well. But I'm going to bring this video to a close. Again, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them. Feel free to subscribe. I have more videos coming. And if you have any suggestions, if you have any suggestions that you would like to leave for me, don't be afraid. Please leave them in the comments, message me. I would love to know what you guys want to see in videos. I would definitely be willing to do whatever kind of video for Walking Dead and Z Nation that you guys want. So, thanks guys. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.